The Royal Crescent Hotel was a beacon of luxury and charm in the heart of the city, a place where history and opulence intertwined to create an experience like no other. As I entered the lobby of the Grand Hotel, I felt a sense of privilege wash over me. I was about to embark on a weekend getaway, a respite from the daily grind, and I had chosen the Royal Crescent for its reputation of being a sanctuary in the bustling metropolis. The concierge, a gentleman by the name of Robert, greeted me with a warm smile. He had the air of someone who had served the hotel for decades, and I had no doubt that his knowledge of the Royal Crescent's history rivaled any historian's. My room, room 417, was a masterpiece of classic elegance. The decor was a seamless blend of traditional and contemporary, and a large window framed a breathtaking view of the city. The city lights spread out like a sparkling tapestry, and I was eager to immerse myself in the luxurious comfort that the Royal Crescent promised. That first evening, I decided to explore the city. The streets were alive with energy, the cacophony of traffic and the hum of conversations filling the air. I roamed the city's bustling markets, indulging in street food and reveling in the vibrant life that surrounded me. The night was filled with laughter, the harmonious blend of languages, and the sweet melodies of street musicians. It was well past midnight when I returned to the Royal Crescent, and the hotel's lobby had transformed into a haven of tranquility. The creepy space exuded an air of timeless elegance, and the concierge, a gentleman named Mr. Lawrence, greeted me with a polite nod. The fourth floor, where room 417 was located, was quiet as I made my way down the corridor. The plush carpeting muffled my footsteps, and the sconces that lined the walls cast elongated shadows. It was as if the corridor had slipped into another era, one where time moved at a slower pace. As I approached the door to room 417, I noticed something unusual. The brass plaque, which typically displayed the room number, was blank. It was as if the room didn't exist, or it was intentionally concealed. The sight sent a cold feeling down my back, but I attributed it to a quirky detail of an old hotel. Turning the handle, I entered the room ready to unwind and savor the comforts of the Royal Crescent. However, the atmosphere within the room was unnaturally cold. I checked the thermostat, which was set at a moderate temperature, yet the chill persisted. I couldn't help but wonder if the old building had heating issues. I decided to draw the heavy curtains to take in the city's magnificent view, but they refused to budge. It was as if they were frozen in place, resisting my efforts to reveal the world outside. I tugged at them with increasing frustration, but they remained immovable. The room's atmosphere was growing increasingly oppressive, and I made my way to the bathroom, hoping to freshen up and shake off the discomfort. However, when I turned on the faucet, icy water rushed out, sending an electric shock through my fingers. I quickly turned it off, bewildered by the unexpected frigidity. I began to wonder if there was an issue with the hotel's plumbing. My discomfort was deepening, and I contemplated calling the front desk for assistance. However, when I picked up the phone on the bedside table, there was no dial tone. It was as if the room existed in a state of isolation, disconnected from the rest of the hotel. I decided to leave room 417 and speak with the concierge about the peculiarities I had encountered. As I approached the door, however, I hesitated. The brass plaque, previously blank, now bore an inscription, Room 417. The sight was bewildering, as if the room's identity had been in a state of flux, its existence uncertain. With a trembling hand, I opened the door, only to be met with a sight that would haunt my dreams for years to come. The room had transformed into a creepy chamber that bore no resemblance to the luxurious quarters I had entered. The wallpaper, once adorned with classic patterns, was now faded and peeling. The ornate furniture was replaced by drab, threadbare pieces, and the grand window that had framed the city's beauty was now veiled by heavy, moth-eaten curtains. I couldn't comprehend the change that had overcome room 417. It was as if I had been transported to a different era, a shadowy reflection of the Royal Crescent's past. My confusion gave way to a growing sense of dread, and I had the overwhelming urge to flee the room. Yet as I turned to leave, the door swung shut with a resounding thud. I was trapped, my heart racing as I struggled to open the door once more. It refused to yield, as if it were sealed against any attempt at escape. The room's temperature plummeted further, and a frigid breath seemed to emanate from the walls. I was engulfed by a sensation of suffocation, as if the very air had thickened with an otherworldly chill. The mirror in the bathroom, once a reflection of my own self, now bore a sinister visage. My reflection was marred by a grotesque distortion, the face in the glass twisted into a rictus of agony. As I stared at the contorted image, a voice, faint and distant, began to emanate from the walls. It was a chorus of whispers, indistinct yet unmistakably sinister. The words were garbled, their meaning lost in the cacophony, but the malevolence of the voices was undeniable. My fear reached a crescendo and I pounded on the door, desperate to escape the nightmarish confines of room 417. The air itself seemed to constrict around me, squeezing the breath from my lungs. And then, as suddenly as it had all begun, it ceased. The door swung open, the room returned to its previous state of elegance, and the frigid atmosphere dissolved. I stumbled out of the room, my pulse still racing, and made my way to the lobby. The night concierge, Mr. Lawrence, looked at me with concern as I recounted my ordeal. He listened patiently, his expression tinged with a mixture of sympathy and disbelief. When I asked about room 417, he hesitated before providing a response. He explained that the room had a notorious history within the hotel, one that had confounded guests and staff for generations. No one had ever been able to explain the enigma of room 417, a place where reality and illusion seemed to intermingle. As I left the Royal Crescent Hotel, I couldn't help but wonder about the countless others who had fallen victim to the room's sinister grasp. Its mysteries remained unsolved and its enigma endured, a chilling reminder that some secrets are meant to remain buried, hidden behind the walls of room 417. Over the years, I heard whispers of others who had encountered the room's scary transformation. Each account varied in detail, but the core experience remained the same: the room's sinister metamorphosis, the chilling voices, and the sense of entrapment. The enigma of room 417 continued to haunt the Royal Crescent, defying explanation and perpetuating its legacy of terror. The city's elite and curious alike would continue to check into the Royal Crescent, each guest tempting fate as they crossed the threshold of room 417. The room, with its history of enigmatic horrors, remained a dark secret within the Grand Hotel, a place where reality blurred with the supernatural, and where the line between the living and the dead grew thin. The end. Story 2. The small town of Willowbrook had always been a place shrouded in mystery. Tucked away in a remote corner of the countryside, it had a history rich with tales of unexplained phenomena and lingering secrets. It was in this enigmatic town that Sarah and Daniel had decided to spend a quiet weekend at the Willowbrook Hotel, a charming and rustic inn nestled among ancient oaks. The couple had come to Willowbrook in search of respite, a break from their busy lives in the bustling city. Sarah, with her fiery red hair and an insatiable curiosity, had a passion for history and a fascination with the unexplained. Daniel, on the other hand, was a pragmatic man, a software engineer who relied on logic and reason. The Willowbrook Hotel was a charming relic from another era, with creaking floorboards, antique furniture, and an air of nostalgia that enchanted its guests. It was rumored to have been a former convent and had a history dating back over a century. The hotel had been beautifully restored, and the couple found themselves enchanted by its timeless charm. Their first evening in Willowbrook was filled with the aroma of the nearby forest and the gentle hush of the river that wound its way through the town. They dined at the hotel's restaurant, savoring local delicacies, and then retreated to their room, which exuded an old-world charm. As the night settled in, Sarah's curiosity got the best of her, and she couldn't resist delving into the history of the hotel. She had read that there were whispers of a ghostly nun who was said to wander the halls at night, a figure from the hotel's mysterious past. Although Daniel dismissed the idea as mere folklore, Sarah couldn't help but be intrigued. Their room was adorned with an antique mirror, a relic from the convent's days. Sarah examined it closely, her reflection mingling with the hotel's rich history. She was convinced that she could see faint, ghostly images in the mirror, figures from a bygone era. Daniel, however, attributed it to the play of light and shadow. The night passed peacefully, and the couple awoke to the gentle rays of the morning sun streaming through their window. They spent the day exploring the town, taking leisurely walks through the lush woods, and enjoying the local cuisine at a nearby cafe. Willowbrook seemed to have an undeniable charm, and they were grateful for their escape from the city's bustling chaos. As the day turned into evening, the couple returned to the hotel, their footsteps echoing in the empty hallway. They had decided to spend the evening in their room, enjoying a quiet dinner in the comfort of their quarters. The sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows in the dimming light. It was while they were dining that the first unusual occurrence took place. The lights in their room flickered and then dimmed, casting the chamber in a dark twilight. Sarah dismissed it as an electrical glitch, but a sense of disquiet settled over Daniel. The couple decided to retire for the night, the light of a single lamp illuminating their path. As they settled into bed, they couldn't shake the feeling that they were not alone. It was as if the room held a silent, watchful presence, and the air seemed charged with an unspoken history. Sarah, still intrigued by the tales of the ghostly nun, suggested conducting a séance, a playful attempt to connect with the past. She lit a few candles, and they held hands, closing their eyes. The room was filled with an expectant silence, broken only by the soft murmur of the nearby river. Suddenly the candles flickered and extinguished, plunging the room into darkness. An icy breeze seemed to sweep through the chamber, and the couple felt a strange presence enveloping them. Sarah's curiosity had quickly given way to fear, and she urged Daniel to stop the séance. The room seemed to respond, and the lights flickered back to life. Despite their unease, the couple attributed the bizarre experience to their imagination, heightened by the stories they had heard. They decided to sleep, hoping for a more peaceful night, but their night was anything but peaceful. As they lay in bed, a soft, ethereal voice filled the room. It was a whisper, barely audible but unmistakably present. The words were garbled like a forgotten language, and the voice seemed to resonate from the walls themselves. Sarah and Daniel exchanged nervous glances, their unease deepening. They couldn't pinpoint the source of the voice, and the air seemed charged with an otherworldly energy. As the whispering continued, it seemed to grow louder and more insistent. Suddenly, a shadowy figure materialized at the foot of their bed. It was a nun dressed in an antiquated habit, her face obscured by a veil. She was a phantom from the past, her form translucent and wavering. The couple watched in paralyzed horror as the ghostly figure extended a bony hand towards them. In a panic, Sarah and Daniel fled from their bed, their hearts pounding with terror. They rushed out of their room and into the hallway, their breathless flight taking them deeper into the hotel's ancient corridors. The corridor was poorly lit, and the flickering sconces cast mysterious shifting shadows. The couple found themselves in a labyrinth of hallways, their sense of direction muddled by the hotel's convoluted layout. The oppressive air seemed to close in around them, and the echoes of their footsteps reverberated through the silence. As they ventured further into the hotel, they encountered more spectral figures, each one a silent sentinel from the past. The ghostly nuns seemed to glide through the walls, their presence hauntingly real. The couple's fear was now mingled with a growing sense of disorientation. In the distance, they heard a soft, mournful chant, a haunting melody that seemed to beckon them. The voice, a chorus of ethereal nuns, echoed through the hallways, leading them deeper into the hotel's enigmatic heart. Sarah and Daniel couldn't resist the call, their curiosity overpowering their fear. They followed the haunting melody, their footsteps guided by an unseen force. The walls themselves seemed to pulse with a forgotten history, a narrative of secrets and regrets. The chant led them to a grand chamber, a place that seemed untouched by time. The room was bathed in a soft, ethereal light, and the walls were adorned with faded frescoes. At the center of the chamber stood a large, ornate mirror, its surface reflecting the ghostly figures that filled the room. The spectral nuns surrounded the mirror, their veiled faces turned towards its surface. As the couple watched in astonishment, the mirror seemed to come to life. Images from the past flickered across its surface, a montage of moments frozen in time. The mirror revealed the history of the convent, a tale of devotion and despair. It showed the nuns' lives, their dedication to their faith, and the sorrow that had enveloped them. The haunting images left an indelible mark on the couple, who now understood the hotel's dark secret. As the mirror's visions faded, the spectral nuns turned toward Sarah and Daniel, their gaze filled with a profound sadness. The couple could feel the weight of the nuns' unspoken stories, their presence a testament to a past that refused to be forgotten. The chant reached its crescendo, and the room seemed to vibrate with an otherworldly energy. Sarah and Daniel were caught in a maelstrom of history, their own lives entwined with the enigmatic past of the Willowbrook Hotel. In an instant, the room returned to its silent, timeless state. The spectral nuns faded into the walls, and the chamber fell into a profound stillness. The couple, their fear replaced by a sense of wonder, felt a deep connection to the hotel and its unexplained mysteries. They returned to their room, and as they lay in bed, they couldn't help but reflect on the events of the night. The enigmatic past of the Willowbrook Hotel had revealed itself, and the couple had become a part of its enduring history. The next morning, as they checked out of the hotel, they couldn't help but feel a sense of gratitude for their encounter with the spectral nuns. The experience had left an indelible mark on them, a reminder that some places held secrets that were meant to be shared with those who dared to seek the unknown. As they left Willowbrook behind, they carried with them a newfound appreciation for the mysteries of the world, and the knowledge that sometimes the most profound experiences could be found in the unlikeliest of places. The small town had revealed its enigmatic heart to the couple, and they would forever be bound by the echoes of the past. The end. Story 3. Emma Daniels was a seasoned businesswoman accustomed to the rigors of corporate life and the demands of the modern world. Her career had taken her to cities across the globe, from the bustling streets of New York to the tranquil charm of Paris. Yet amidst the constant flurry of meetings and deadlines, she yearned for a respite, a sanctuary to escape the cacophony of her fast-paced life. It was during a rare moment of self-indulgence that Emma stumbled upon the Sedgwick Hotel, an elegant establishment nestled in a picturesque town. Its Victorian charm and aura of quiet sophistication beckoned to her weary soul, and she couldn't resist the allure of its promise, a tranquil retreat away from the chaos of the corporate world. Upon her arrival, Emma was greeted by the warm smile of the hotel's concierge, a gentleman named Mr. Thompson. He was a true embodiment of old-world hospitality, his manner exuding a genuine warmth that instantly put her at ease. Emma's room, room 314, was a vision of timeless elegance, with its plush furnishings and a view of the verdant gardens that stretched beyond the hotel's windows. The Sedgwick Hotel seemed like the perfect haven for Emma, a place where she could escape the clutches of her demanding career and find solace in the simple pleasures of life. The town was a haven of tranquility, with its cobbled streets, charming boutiques, and friendly locals who greeted her with smiles. As the sun set over the town, Emma dined at the hotel's restaurant, savoring each exquisite dish that was presented before her. The flavors were a symphony for her senses, and she marveled at how this quaint town could hold such culinary treasures. After dinner, she retired to her room, eager to savor the quiet solitude it offered. As Emma settled into the plush armchair by the window, a sense of serenity washed over her. The room seemed to embrace her, its soothing ambience a balm for her weary soul. She decided to spend the evening lost in a good book, immersing herself in the world of fiction as the town's lights twinkled beyond her window. Yet as the night deepened and the town grew quiet, Emma became aware of a faint sound that seemed to echo through the walls. It was a soft, almost imperceptible noise, like a distant whisper that teased her senses. She paused, her book forgotten in her lap as she strained to discern the source of the sound. The noise seemed to emanate from the room next door, room 315. It was a barely audible murmur, indistinct yet persistent. Emma couldn't help but wonder if her neighbor had left a television or a radio on, its volume lowered to a mere whisper. As the minutes passed, the noise continued, its soft cadence growing increasingly unsettling. Emma could hear voices, muffled and hushed, as if a conversation was taking place in the adjacent room. Yet the words remained unintelligible, their meaning eluding her. Intrigued and perturbed in equal measure, Emma decided to investigate the source of the sound. She rose from her chair and crossed to the door that connected her room to room 315. She hesitated for a moment, her hand poised to knock, but before she could do so, the noise ceased abruptly. Confused and disconcerted, Emma returned to her room, unsure of what to make of the strange occurrence. She had barely settled back into her armchair when the noise resumed, as if in response to her departure. The whispered voices continued, their tone growing increasingly agitated. Determined to unravel the mystery, Emma decided to knock on the door of room 315. She could no longer ignore the enigmatic sounds that had captured her attention. With a sense of trepidation, she crossed to the adjoining door and rapped her knuckles against its surface. The noise inside room 315 ceased once more, and there was a moment of silence. Then, the door creaked open slowly, revealing the interior of the neighboring room. Emma peered inside, her heart pounding, but there was no one to be seen. The room appeared empty, its furnishings untouched. There was no sign of a television or a radio, and the whispered voices had fallen silent. Emma's sense of disquiet deepened, and she couldn't help but wonder if she had imagined the entire episode. Feeling both bewildered and embarrassed, she withdrew from room 315, allowing the door to swing shut behind her. She returned to her room, determined to put the strange occurrence behind her and resume her evening of relaxation. But the whispered voices refused to be forgotten. They seemed to echo in her mind, haunting her thoughts and refusing to release their hold. As Emma lay in her bed, the sound of the hushed conversation filled her ears once more, as if it emanated from the very walls themselves. Unable to ignore the enigmatic voices any longer, Emma called the front desk and spoke with Mr. Thompson, the concierge. She explained the strange sounds coming from room 315 and requested that someone investigate the matter. Mr. Thompson assured her that he would look into the situation, and a short while later he arrived at Emma's door. He wore a concerned expression as he listened to the noises coming from room 315, confirming that there was indeed something amiss. Together they approached the door of room 315 and once again Emma knocked. This time there was no response, and Mr. Thompson used a master key to unlock the door and enter the room. The chamber was bathed in an half light, its curtains drawn to create a dim, almost oppressive ambience. As they stepped into the room, they found it to be as empty as it had appeared before. There were no signs of guests, and the whispered voices had once again fallen silent. As Mr. Thompson searched the room, Emma couldn't shake the sense of disquiet that filled her. She felt a compulsion to investigate further. With Mr. Thompson's permission, she decided to search the room herself, drawn by an inexplicable need to uncover the source of the enigmatic voices. As she combed through room 315, Emma couldn't find any clues that would explain the strange noises. The furniture was impeccably arranged, and the chamber was devoid of any electronic devices. The window offered a view of the night-shrouded town, its serenity in stark contrast to the unsettling events within. As Emma reached the bathroom, she noticed that the door was ajar. She pushed it open, revealing a scene that she could not believe. The bathroom was empty, but a faint, ghostly whisper seemed to emanate from within, its source concealed from view. Emma stepped into the bathroom, drawn by the ethereal sound. She searched for the origin of the noise, her gaze fixated on the ceiling. It was there that she noticed an air vent, its metal grill partially dislodged. With a sense of trepidation, Emma removed the grill and peered inside. To her astonishment, she discovered a hidden chamber within the walls of the hotel. The space was cramped, its walls lined with ancient decaying manuscripts and journals. As Emma retrieved the writings, she realized that they were diaries, accounts of long-forgotten guests who had stayed in the room. The pages were filled with cryptic entries, describing the same whispered voices that she had heard, the same conversations that had haunted her. It became clear that the voices were not a figment of her imagination. The diaries revealed that countless guests had reported similar experiences, and the room itself had gained a sinister reputation. The writings spoke of an inexplicable presence, of voices that seemed to transcend time and space. Emma couldn't help but be captivated by the diaries, their words drawing her deeper into the enigma of room 315. As she continued to read, she discovered that the room had been the site of unexplained phenomena for decades, with guests reporting whispered voices, shadowy apparitions, and a sense of being watched. Intrigued and unnerved, Emma returned to her room, the diaries in hand, and shared her discoveries with Mr. Thompson. The hotel staff had been unaware of the hidden chamber within the walls, and the revelation left them with a sense of unease. Together, Emma and Mr. Thompson decided to conduct a thorough investigation into the history of room 315. They sought out local archives, delving into the town's past in search of answers. What they uncovered was a chilling tale of tragedy and unexplained occurrences. Room 315 had once been part of a grand mansion that had stood on the hotel's grounds. The mansion had been the residence of a wealthy family, the Howards, who had lived there in the late 19th century. The family had been known for their reclusive nature and had rarely been seen in the town. As Emma and Mr. Thompson delved deeper into the history of the Howards, they discovered that the family's isolation had been shrouded in mystery. Rumors abounded that they had been involved in arcane practices and had been consumed by a sense of foreboding. The diaries penned by various guests who had stayed in room 315 over the years revealed a recurring theme. They spoke of whispered voices and the sensation of being watched, as if the room itself held a dark presence. The enigma of room 315 had endured for generations, a haunting legacy that continued to bewilder and terrify those who entered its walls. It was as if the room had become a repository of the past, a place where the voices of the Howards and their unexplained secrets continued to echo. The hotel staff decided to seal off room 315, no longer allowing guests to stay there. Emma returned to her room, the diaries a testament to the enigmatic history of the Sedgwick Hotel. As she lay in her bed, she couldn't help but wonder about the countless guests who had been lured by the whispered voices of room 315, and the secrets that continued to elude understanding. The soft murmur of chatter and the clinking of cutlery filled the elegant restaurant as diners indulged in fine cuisine. It was a place where laughter, romance, and exquisite dishes danced together, and the soft glow of candlelight cast an enchanting spell over the room. Sarah and Mark had chosen this restaurant for their anniversary, eager to celebrate their 2 years of love and devotion in a place known for its exquisite culinary delights. As the couple sat at their table, exchanging smiles and holding hands across the polished mahogany, a subtle unease began to creep over them. Sarah had noticed a man sitting alone at the bar, his gaze fixated on their table. His dark, piercing eyes seemed to bore into her, making her skin prickle with discomfort. She nudged Mark and nodded subtly in the direction of the bar. "Mark, do you see that man at the bar?" she whispered, trying not to alarm the other diners. Mark turned to glance discreetly at the bar and saw the stranger. A shiver ran down his spine as he observed the man, dressed in a perfectly tailored suit that exuded an aura of affluence, yet his eyes were devoid of warmth. "Yeah, I see him," Mark replied in a hushed tone. "He's been staring at us for a while now. It's unsettling." Unsure of what to do, Sarah and Mark returned their attention to their meal, hoping the strange man would lose interest and move on. But his gaze remained unwavering, an unsettling presence that cast a dark cloud over their special evening. The hours passed, and the stranger's relentless stare continued to haunt them. Each time Sarah and Mark tried to catch his eye, he looked away, as if playing a sinister game. Their celebration had turned into an anxious ordeal, and they debated leaving the restaurant early. However, they were determined not to let this stranger ruin their special night. Eventually, the couple decided to confront the man, hoping that a polite inquiry would dissuade him. Mark excused himself from the table and approached the bar, where the stranger sat sipping a glass of red wine. With a forced smile, Mark initiated the conversation. "Excuse me, sir," Mark began, trying to sound nonchalant. "My wife and I couldn't help but notice that you've been watching us. Is there something you need?" The stranger turned to face Mark, his expression remaining cold and aloof. "Watching? I'm merely enjoying the ambiance of this fine establishment as you are." Mark sensed an air of arrogance in the stranger's tone, but decided not to escalate the situation further. He returned to their table and whispered to Sarah, "I talked to him, and he claims he's just here for the ambiance. Let's finish our meal and go." But as they resumed their dinner, the creepy sensation of being watched persisted. It seemed as if the stranger had intensified his gaze, his unrelenting eyes now locked onto Sarah, who could feel his presence like a weight on her soul. In a last-ditch effort to defuse the situation, Mark summoned the restaurant manager and discreetly informed him of their discomfort. The manager approached the stranger and engaged him in a quiet conversation. However, the stranger's demeanor remained unchanged, and he merely waved the manager away. As their unease deepened, Sarah and Mark grew more anxious, feeling trapped in the clutches of an inexplicable nightmare. The stranger's relentless gaze had transformed into a malevolent force, causing their anniversary dinner to unravel into a nightmarish ordeal. With dessert untouched, they decided to cut their losses and leave the restaurant. As they stood up to depart, the stranger also rose from his seat, his unsettling smile curving into a sinister grin. It was clear that he had no intention of letting them escape his grip. They rushed toward the exit. The restaurant's ambiance that had once enchanted them now felt suffocating and sinister. Panic clawed at their throats as they reached the door, but to their horror, the stranger was right behind them. His cold fingers brushed against Sarah's shoulder as he whispered, "Leaving so soon? I've been waiting for this." In a heart-pounding moment, Mark shoved the stranger away and they sprinted out of the restaurant, leaving their unfinished anniversary dinner behind. They hailed a cab, but before they could drive away, they saw the stranger standing in the restaurant's entrance, watching them with those unnerving eyes. Over the next few weeks, Sarah and Mark's lives were plagued by an insidious terror. The stalker, whose name they still didn't know, made his presence felt at every turn. They received anonymous phone calls, where the caller breathed heavily into the receiver before hanging up. Their home was broken into, their personal belongings disturbed, but not stolen. The nightmare had become all-consuming. They sought the help of the police, who could do little without concrete evidence of a crime. The stalker was cunning, leaving no trace of his identity. Even their friends and family grew skeptical of their claims, suggesting it might all be a figment of their imagination. The stalker continued to torment them, sending cryptic letters and packages containing scary mementos of their anniversary night. The police investigation yielded no results, and the couple's desperation grew. One evening, as Sarah and Mark sat in their dimly lit living room, a chilling letter arrived. It read, "You can't escape me. I will always be there, lurking in the shadows. Your love will turn to fear, and your fear will consume you. Say goodbye to your peace, for I am your shadow." The couple was paralyzed with fear, realizing that their tormentor had invaded the sanctity of their home, their most private space. The police were called once again, but the stalker's cunning remained unmatched and they couldn't trace the source of the letter. As the nightmare dragged on, the couple's love began to fray. The strain of constant fear wore them down, sapping their joy and replacing it with dread. They started to drift apart, their once strong bond weakening under the weight of their unending terror. One fateful night, as Sarah lay alone in her bed, she heard a creaking sound from the hallway. Her heart pounded as she clutched the covers, paralyzed by fear. The footsteps grew closer, slow and deliberate, and then a shadowy figure appeared in the doorway. It was the stalker, his face concealed in the darkness. "Sarah," he whispered, his voice a chilling echo. "You can't escape me." With a scream, Sarah tried to flee, but the stalker was upon her in an instant. The room became a battleground of terror and survival. She fought with every ounce of strength she had, desperately clawing, biting, and screaming for help. Mark, awakened by the commotion, rushed into the room and was met with a horrific sight. The stalker was on top of Sarah, his gloved hands gripping her throat, squeezing the life out of her. In a blind fury, Mark lunged at the attacker and a brutal struggle ensued. The stalker fought fiercely, but Mark's love for Sarah and a surge of adrenaline gave him the upper hand. With one final desperate push, he managed to overpower the stalker, pinning him to the floor. The stalker's mask slipped off in the struggle, revealing a face twisted by madness and obsession. The police arrived just in time to apprehend the stalker, who had been unmasked as a man named Victor Rourke, a former acquaintance of Mark's from years ago. The motive behind his relentless stalking remained a mystery, as Rourke refused to speak about it. Sarah survived the attack, though she bore both physical and emotional scars from the ordeal. Mark's unwavering love and heroism had saved her life, but the trauma of the past months had left indelible marks on their souls. The end. Second story. In the heart of the bustling city, nestled amidst a row of quaint buildings, stood a charming little restaurant known as La Cuisson. With its warm ambiance and delectable cuisine, it had earned a loyal following of food enthusiasts who flocked there for an unforgettable dining experience. The restaurant's success was attributed to the talented and enigmatic head chef, Lucien Duval, whose dishes were nothing short of culinary masterpieces. Lucien had an air of mystery about him, always seen in the kitchen but rarely in the dining area. His tall, gaunt figure moved with a strange grace, and his icy blue eyes held a secret that no one could decipher. His presence had a magnetic pull, drawing patrons from far and wide who were eager to savor the culinary delights he conjured. One such evening, a young couple, Alex and Julia, found themselves at La Cuisson. It was their anniversary, and they had heard raving reviews about the restaurant. The soft romantic lighting and the aroma of gourmet cuisine set the perfect mood for the occasion. The couple was seated at a cozy table near the window, each moment steeped in anticipation. As they perused the menu, Alex couldn't help but inquire about the elusive head chef. "Have you heard about this Lucien Duval, Julia? They say he's a culinary genius, but no one knows much about him." Julia nodded, her hazel eyes shining with excitement. "Yes, I read an article about him. They call him the Chef of Shadows. He's like a culinary ghost, known for creating dishes that are out of this world. I can't wait to taste his creations." Their meal arrived, and the first bite of the exquisite dishes was like a revelation. Each course was a masterpiece, a symphony of flavors that transcended their wildest culinary dreams. Their taste buds danced with delight as they indulged in the culinary artistry of Lucien Duval. After the meal, the couple asked the waiter if they could meet the head chef and express their gratitude in person. The waiter hesitated for a moment before agreeing to arrange a meeting. A few minutes later, Lucien Duval emerged from the kitchen, his tall, imposing figure casting a shadow across the dining room. "Ah, you wish to meet the elusive chef himself," Lucien said in a low, melodious voice that held an otherworldly quality. He approached their table with an enigmatic smile, his piercing blue eyes fixed on them. "I am pleased that you enjoyed your meal. It's not often that I come out to greet our patrons." Alex and Julia felt a cold feeling running down their spines as they gazed into Lucien's eyes. There was something in his gaze, an unsettling intensity that left them both feeling vulnerable and exposed. But his charm and the allure of his culinary prowess overshadowed their unease. The conversation flowed, and Lucien shared stories of his culinary journey and his inspiration behind each dish. He revealed that he was a man of few words, preferring to express himself through his culinary creations. Julia found herself drawn to him, unable to look away from his mesmerizing presence. As the evening drew to a close, Lucien handed Alex and Julia a small handwritten note. "A token of my appreciation for your visit," he said, his smile never wavering. They thanked him and left the restaurant, still captivated by the experience. Little did they know that their lives were about to take a dark and twisted turn. Over the next few weeks, Alex and Julia became frequent visitors to La Cuisson. Their obsession with Lucien's culinary creations deepened, and they found themselves enthralled by the enigmatic chef's presence. With each visit, they grew more infatuated with him, and their lives began to revolve around the restaurant. One evening after their meal, Lucien invited them to the kitchen to witness the magic behind his creations. Julia was thrilled, and Alex couldn't help but wonder if their fascination was becoming an obsession. In the kitchen, they watched as Lucien worked his culinary wizardry, his hands moving with a grace that seemed almost supernatural. As they left the kitchen, Lucien handed Julia another note. "A special gift for our most loyal patrons," he said with a sly smile. The note contained an invitation to a private dinner event hosted by Lucien himself at the restaurant. It was an opportunity they couldn't resist, and they eagerly accepted. The night of the private dinner arrived, and the couple was filled with excitement. They were among a select few guests seated at a long, elegantly decorated table. Lucien moved between tables, sharing stories and anecdotes, creating an intimate atmosphere. As the evening progressed, Julia noticed that some of the other guests seemed oddly subdued. Their eyes were glazed, and they spoke in hushed tones as if under a spell. She mentioned her observations to Alex, who dismissed her concerns, attributing the odd behavior to the enchantment of the evening. As the night wore on, the couple felt an increasing compulsion to please Lucien, to gain his favor. They hung on his every word, eager to meet his expectations. The intoxicating aura of the evening had them in its grip, and their obsession with Lucien deepened to a point where they would do anything to keep him happy. Finally, it was time for the pièce de résistance. Lucien unveiled a grand feast, an opulent display of culinary brilliance. Each course was a work of art, a fusion of flavors that transcended the boundaries of reality. It was a meal like no other, and the guests indulged with fervor, unaware of the sinister undercurrent that ran through the evening. As the final course was served, Lucian made a chilling announcement. "Tonight we shall partake in a tradition that has been passed down through generations," he said, his voice carrying an eerie resonance. "A tradition that binds us together forever." He raised a glass filled with a deep red liquid, and the other guests followed suit, their eyes glazed and vacant. Alex and Julia were caught in the hypnotic spell of the evening, unable to resist. They raised their glasses and drank, the liquid burning like fire as it coursed down their throats. Within moments, they felt an excruciating pain searing through their bodies, as if their very souls were being torn apart. Their vision blurred, and they gasped for breath, unable to comprehend the horror unfolding around them. As their consciousness slipped away, they saw the other guests convulsing and writhing in agony, their faces contorted in a silent scream. Lucien's smile remained intact, a sinister glint in his eyes. The next morning, the police received an anonymous tip about a series of gruesome murders at La Cuisson. When they arrived, they found a scene of unimaginable horror. The restaurant was drenched in blood, and the lifeless bodies of the guests were scattered throughout, their faces frozen in a grotesque rictus of agony. Lucien Duval, the enigmatic head chef, was nowhere to be found. He had vanished into the shadows, leaving behind a trail of terror and death. The investigation that followed would reveal the true extent of his malevolent obsession with culinary perfection, and the twisted rituals he had used to bind his victims to him. The horror of that night would haunt the city for years to come, a chilling reminder that even in the world of fine dining and gourmet cuisine, the line between obsession and madness could be razor thin. I rented an Airbnb for a short vacation, eager for a break from the hustle and bustle of my city life. The listing boasted a cozy cottage in the woods, promising tranquility and a chance to reconnect with nature. It seemed like the perfect escape, and I was excited to leave the city behind for a while. The drive to the cottage was long and winding, the road becoming progressively narrower as I ventured deeper into the woods. The lush greenery and towering trees enveloped me, and a sense of isolation began to set in. I couldn't help but feel a little apprehensive as the world I knew faded away, and the forest closed in around me. After what felt like hours, I arrived at the address provided. The cottage was a charming sight, nestled amidst the trees with a small, meandering stream nearby. It looked like something out of a fairy tale, and I couldn't help but smile at the idyllic setting. My host, a middle-aged man named Richard, greeted me warmly. He was polite and seemed genuinely concerned about ensuring my stay was comfortable. The cottage was cozy, with all the amenities I needed for a peaceful getaway. Richard had prepared a basket of fresh fruits and a handwritten note, welcoming me to his slice of paradise. As I settled in, I couldn't help but feel a sense of relief wash over me. The solitude and beauty of the place were exactly what I had been looking for. The days were spent hiking in the woods, reading by the stream, and watching the fireflies dance in the evening light. It was blissful, a world away from my city life. But as the days turned into nights, a subtle undercurrent of unease began to surface. The silence of the woods was oppressive, and the shadows that lurked in the trees seemed to carry secrets of their own. I told myself it was just my imagination running wild, that I was simply not used to the quiet of the forest. One evening, as I was sitting on the porch, I noticed a path leading deeper into the woods. I hadn't explored that direction yet, and curiosity got the better of me. I decided to follow the trail, hoping to discover a hidden gem in the woods. The path led me to a small clearing where I found an old, overgrown garden. It was a beautiful spot, but it had been neglected for some time. Wildflowers had taken over, and the remnants of what must have once been a vibrant garden were now barely visible. It was both enchanting and eerie, and I couldn't help but feel a sense of melancholy in the air. As I wandered through the garden, I discovered a weathered gravestone hidden among the wildflowers. The inscription was barely legible, but I could make out the name Eleanor. The gravestone seemed out of place in the garden, and I couldn't help but wonder who Eleanor had been. I returned to the cottage, my mind filled with questions. I asked Richard about the garden and the gravestone, and his demeanor changed subtly. He seemed uncomfortable and avoided giving me a direct answer. Instead, he mumbled something about the garden being a remnant of the previous owner's passion and urged me not to worry about it. Despite his reassurance, the unease that had been growing within me intensified. There was something about the garden, about Richard's reaction, that felt off. I couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to this place than met the eye. As the days passed, I became more attuned to the subtle details of the cottage. The rooms were filled with old furniture and knickknacks, each piece seeming to carry a story of its own. I had a growing suspicion that Richard was not the only one who had lived in this cottage. One afternoon, while searching for a spare blanket in the attic, I stumbled upon a box of old photographs. They depicted a family, a couple with 2 children, and a small cottage in the woods. The photographs were dated from decades ago, and I couldn't help but feel a connection between the images and the cottage I now inhabited. I decided to dig deeper into the history of the cottage, hoping to uncover the secrets that seemed to be lurking within its walls. I reached out to the local library and conducted research into the area. It was then that I stumbled upon a news article from the 1960s, a headline that made my blood turn cold. The article described a tragedy that had taken place in the very cottage I was staying in. A family of 4 had lived there, but their lives had been cut short in a horrific accident. The cause of the accident was never determined, and the cottage had been left abandoned ever since. As I read the details of the story, my mind raced with questions. It seemed that Richard had not been entirely truthful about the cottage's history. I couldn't help but feel a sense of foreboding, as though the spirits of the past were reaching out to me, urging me to uncover the truth. One evening I decided to explore the garden again, drawn to the mystery of Eleanor's gravestone. The sun had dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows in the fading light. I reached the garden and stood before the gravestone, the air heavy with a sense of the past. As I gazed at the gravestone, I heard a soft whisper in the wind, a voice that seemed to come from the depths of the forest. It was a name, Eleanor, carried on the breeze. The sound was so faint, so distant, that I couldn't be sure if I had truly heard it, or if it was a figment of my imagination. But I couldn't ignore the sensation that the cottage and the garden held a connection to the family from the past, that their story was entwined with the place I now called home. The unease that had been growing within me intensified, and I knew I had to uncover the truth. The next day, I decided to reach out to the local community for information about the family who had once lived in the cottage. I visited the nearby town and began asking questions, hoping to find someone who remembered the family from decades ago. It was a long and tedious process, but eventually I struck a breakthrough. An elderly woman in the town had known the family and remembered their tragic story. She told me about Eleanor, the youngest daughter who had died under mysterious circumstances. Eleanor had been a bright and lively child, the woman explained, but her death had cast a shadow over the family. It was believed that she had drowned in the stream near the cottage, but the circumstances surrounding her death had always been unclear. There were whispers of foul play, of secrets that had been buried with her. As I listened to the woman's story, my heart raced. The pieces of the puzzle were slowly falling into place. It seemed that the spirits of the past were reaching out to me, urging me to uncover the truth of what had happened to Eleanor. I returned to the cottage, my mind filled with a sense of determination. It was clear that Richard had been keeping secrets, that he knew more about the history of the cottage than he had let on. I needed to confront him, to demand answers about Eleanor and the family from the past. That evening, I found Richard in the living room, sitting by the fireplace. I could see the unease in his eyes as I approached, and I wasted no time in confronting him about the family's history. Richard hesitated for a moment, his gaze fixed on the flickering flames in the fireplace. Then he began to speak, his voice heavy with sorrow. He revealed that he was the sole surviving member of the family, that he had been a child at the time of Eleanor's death. He told me the truth about the family's history, about the darkness that had cast a shadow over their lives. It was a tale of secrets and tragedy, of a young girl's life cut short under mysterious circumstances. He explained that Eleanor's death had torn the family apart, that her memory still haunted him to this day. As he spoke, I could see the pain in his eyes, the weight of guilt that he had carried for decades. It became clear that Richard had chosen to keep the family's history hidden, that he had wanted to protect me from the darkness that lurked within the cottage. But the truth had a way of coming to light, and as Richard finished his story, I couldn't help but feel a sense of closure. Eleanor's spirit had reached out to me, urging me to uncover the truth, and in doing so I had helped to bring the family story to light. The following days were filled with a sense of healing and understanding. Richard and I spent hours talking about the past, sharing our memories of the family and the cottage. It was a bittersweet experience, a chance to come to terms with the tragedy that had unfolded there. As I prepared to leave the cottage, I couldn't help but feel a sense of gratitude for the lessons I had learned. The spirits of the past had reminded me of the importance of uncovering the truth, of not letting the secrets of history remain buried. The cottage in the woods had been a place of beauty and darkness, a sanctuary for the lost, and a repository of the past. Eleanor's spirit had reached out to me, urging me to uncover the truth, and in doing so, I had helped to bring her memory to light. As I drove away from the cottage, I couldn't help but feel that Eleanor's presence still lingered, watching over the place she had once called home. The shadows of the past had been dispelled, and in their place there was a sense of peace and closure. The cottage in the woods had been a place of secrets and mysteries, but it had also been a place of healing and understanding. And as I looked back at the cottage one last time, I knew that its history would forever be a part of my own story, a reminder of the enduring power of the past and the importance of uncovering the truth. In the heart of summer, 4 friends, Lisa, Jake, Sarah, and Mike, decided to embark on a road trip that would take them through the picturesque landscapes of the American Southwest. With a packed car, they set out on a journey filled with laughter, adventure, and the promise of unforgettable memories. Their chosen route would lead them through desolate stretches of highway that wound through vast, arid deserts, isolated and remote. As they drove, the scenery transformed from bustling cities to barren wilderness, and the open road seemed to stretch on forever. Lisa, the driver, navigated with precision as Jake, her partner, manned the stereo. Their laughter filled the car, and they sang along to their favorite tunes, their spirits high as they embraced the freedom of the open road. Sarah and Mike in the back seat shared jokes and snacks, their faces illuminated by the ever-present glow of their smartphones. Hours passed, and the group marveled at the stunning vistas that unfolded before them. The landscape was simultaneously awe-inspiring and desolate, a stark reminder of the vastness of nature. But as the sun dipped below the horizon, the realization dawned that they were venturing deeper into the isolated desert, with no signs of civilization in sight. "We should probably find a gas station soon," Lisa remarked, her eyes scanning the barren landscape. Jake consulted the map and his smartphone, trying to determine the nearest gas station. There should be one a bit further ahead, but it's hard to tell exactly how far. With growing concern, they continued driving, hoping to reach the elusive gas station before their fuel gauge reached empty. But the hours passed and their situation grew more precarious. The landscape became increasingly desolate with no signs of life or infrastructure. The fuel gauge continued its relentless descent, and anxiety filled the car. Jake's phone lost signal, leaving them without GPS or a means to contact anyone for help. The group exchanged worried glances, realizing they were in a dire predicament. "It's been hours since we saw a gas station," Lisa said, her voice tinged with panic. Mike, trying to stay positive, tried to reassure the group. "There's got to be something up ahead, we'll make it." As the last dregs of fuel were siphoned from the tank, the engine sputtered and died. The car coasted to a halt on the side of the highway, surrounded by an endless expanse of desert under the moonlight. Desperation hung heavy in the air as they stepped out of the car and looked around. The silence was dark, broken only by the howling of the wind through the barren landscape. "We can't stay out here," Sarah said, her voice trembling. Mike's face was grim as he surveyed the empty highway. "We'll have to start walking and look for help. Maybe we'll find a gas station or a passing vehicle." With no other option, they set off on foot, clutching their flashlights and whatever supplies they had in the car. The desert night was unforgiving, the temperature dropping rapidly, and the haunting emptiness of the landscape added to their growing fear. Hours turned into a seemingly endless trek, and their energy waned. Sarah and Lisa shivered in the cold desert air, their feet aching from the miles they'd walked. Their hope began to fade, replaced by a gnawing dread that they might never find help in this desolation. Suddenly, Mike spotted a distant glow on the horizon. "Look, there's a light. It could be a gas station or a building. Let's go." Renewed with hope, they quickened their pace, heading toward the distant light. But as they approached, they realized it was not a gas station, but a solitary, dilapidated building that seemed abandoned for years. The flickering neon sign that once declared Oasis Diner hung precariously, its letters missing or askew. Reluctantly, they entered the diner, their flashlights revealing a scene frozen in time. Dust-covered tables and chairs, shattered glass, and tattered menus were strewn about the interior. It was a haunting sight that left them with a sense of foreboding. Mike called out, but there was no response. The place seemed deserted, and its silence was scary. With no other options, they decided to search for any supplies that might help them get back on the road. As they explored the diner, they discovered an old cash register, empty except for a few decaying dollar bills. In the kitchen, they found a pantry with canned goods and bottled water, which would sustain them for a short while. The group debated whether to spend the night in the abandoned diner or continue their journey on foot. The decision was fraught with uncertainty, but the chilling isolation of the desert night outside made the choice clear. They decided to stay and rest before resuming their quest for help at first light. In the diner's back room, they huddled together, trying to find comfort and warmth. They shared stories and jokes to lighten the mood, but the strange surroundings and their dire situation hung heavily over them. Sleep proved elusive, as the hours crept by in torturous silence. The sense of isolation weighed on them, and their growing anxiety made each creak of the abandoned building seem like an impending threat. Just as they were beginning to doze off, a haunting sound echoed through the diner, a sound that sent a cold feeling down their backs. It was a faint, creepy melody, like an old music box playing a twisted lullaby. The group's eyes met, their faces pale with fear. "Did you hear that?" Jake whispered, his voice trembling. Sarah nodded, her eyes wide with terror. "It's coming from the kitchen." Mike, with a flashlight in hand, ventured into the dark kitchen. The others followed, their hearts pounding as the haunting melody grew louder. As they entered the kitchen, they discovered the source of the sound. An old music box on the counter, its cracked lid slightly ajar. The music box played its haunting tune with a life of its own, its winding key untouched. The melody had an ethereal quality, as if it were beckoning them to some dark, mysterious place. Terrified and unable to comprehend the phenomenon, they watched as the lid of the music box slowly closed, its music fading into silence. Goosebumps covered their skin, and a sense of dread weighed heavily on their hearts. Before they could react, a figure emerged from the shadows of the kitchen, its presence sending shockwaves of fear through their bodies. It was a haggard, emaciated man, dressed in rags, his eyes hollow and empty. The man's voice croaked as he whispered, "You should have left when you had the chance." The group retreated in terror, their hearts racing as they realized they were not alone in the abandoned diner. The man's ghastly appearance and his cryptic words left them paralyzed with fear. Their instincts kicked in and they ran for the exit, fleeing the diner in a panic. The night had grown colder and the desert was an even more inhospitable place than they had thought. They were filled with a deep sense of dread, unsure of what horrors awaited them in the desolate darkness. As they ventured further into the desert, the echoes of the haunting melody and the spectral presence of the man lingered in their minds, haunting their every step. The night was unrelenting, and their fear grew with each passing moment. Their desperate journey seemed endless, and they were tormented by the belief that they were being pursued by an unseen force. The desert landscape stretched out before them, an unforgiving expanse that offered no solace. Just as exhaustion threatened to overcome them, they spotted the distant glow of headlights. A vehicle was approaching, and they waved their arms frantically, their voices hoarse as they cried for help. The vehicle slowed to a stop and a lone figure stepped out. It was a truck driver, a grizzled man with a weathered face who listened to their story with a mixture of concern and skepticism. "We ran out of gas and ended up in an abandoned diner," Lisa explained, her voice shaking. "We heard a music box playing by itself, and there was a man there who said we should have left." The truck driver's expression darkened and he glanced toward the horizon. "You're lucky I found you. That abandoned diner has a dark history. They say it's haunted by the souls of those who got lost in the desert and never found their way out. With a sense of urgency, the truck driver offered to take them to the nearest town, where they could get the help they needed. As they piled into the truck, their relief was palpable, and they couldn't escape the feeling that they had narrowly escaped a horrific fate. Story 2. In the heart of summer, Mark set out on a cross-country journey to visit his family. The open road stretched before him, inviting him to embark on an adventure filled with excitement and the promise of reunions with loved ones. Armed with a map, a trusty old car, and a sense of adventure, he headed out, leaving behind the bustling city for the wide expanse of the countryside. As Mark drove through picturesque landscapes and quiet towns, he marveled at the diversity of the country. The journey was marked by changing scenery, from lush forests to rolling hills and dusty highways. Along the way, he exchanged pleasantries with friendly strangers, visited quaint diners, and admired roadside attractions. The trip was proving to be everything he had hoped for. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Mark found himself in a remote stretch of the highway, far from any signs of civilization. The desolation of the area was almost sinister, with miles of empty road surrounded by an expansive wilderness. As he drove, he noticed that his fuel gauge was approaching empty, and the nearest gas station was still miles away. Growing increasingly anxious, Mark kept an eye on the fuel gauge, hoping that he could reach the gas station in time. But as the needle inched closer to E, a sense of unease settled in. He knew he was in a remote area, and the idea of running out of gas in the middle of nowhere was unsettling. The car's engine sputtered, and Mark watched in dread as the fuel gauge finally hit E. The engine died, and he coasted to a stop on the side of the highway. Panic surged through him as he realized the predicament he was in, stranded in a desolate place with no one in sight. Mark's initial reaction was to call for help, but to his dismay, he discovered that his cell phone had no signal in the remote location. He felt a sense of isolation and vulnerability, and his mind raced as he tried to figure out what to do next. Just as he was considering starting the long walk to the gas station, a vehicle approached from behind. A pickup truck pulled up, and Mark watched with a mixture of relief and caution as a burly man in his 40s stepped out. The man wore a worn flannel shirt, and his face was obscured by a scruffy beard. He had a gruff appearance, and Mark couldn't quite read his intentions. "Car trouble?" the man asked, his voice a gravelly baritone. Mark nodded, trying to sound as composed as possible. "Yeah, I ran out of gas. I was just about to start walking to the gas station." The man's response was a slow, almost menacing smile that made Mark freeze. "No need for that, friend. I can help you out." Reluctantly, Mark accepted the man's offer of assistance. The stranger retrieved a gas can from his truck and began pouring the fuel into Mark's tank. As he worked, he engaged Mark in conversation, asking about his journey and his destination. Mark was polite but guarded, sensing something unsettling about the man. There was an air of intensity and a strange gleam in the stranger's eyes that made him uncomfortable. Still, he couldn't afford to turn down the help, especially in such a remote area. As the man finished refueling the car, Mark tried to offer him some money as a token of appreciation. The stranger waved it away with a dismissive gesture. "No need for that. I'm just glad I could help out a fellow traveler." Mark felt a growing sense of unease as the man returned to his truck. He thanked the stranger and got back into his car, eager to leave the desolate stretch of highway behind. However, as he pulled away, he noticed the stranger getting into his truck as well, and an uncomfortable feeling gnawed at his gut. Mark couldn't shake the sensation that he was being followed. He tried to rationalize it, telling himself that the man might be going in the same direction, but the unease persisted. The stranger's presence and the strange conversation they had shared haunted him as he drove on. Miles passed, and the highway seemed to stretch on forever. The stranger remained a constant presence in Mark's rearview mirror. Never too close, but never too far either. The paranoia grew, and he couldn't escape the nagging feeling that something was horribly wrong. To put his mind at ease, Mark decided to exit the highway at the next opportunity, hoping to lose the stranger on the back roads. He made a quick turn, leaving the main road behind, and tried to find a place to lay low. As he navigated the winding roads, he glanced in his rearview mirror, relieved to see that the stranger was nowhere in sight. Mark drove for several more miles, feeling a renewed sense of freedom. It seemed that he had successfully eluded his unwanted companion. He decided to stop at a nearby rest area to gather his thoughts and plan his next move. But just as he pulled into the empty rest area and parked his car, a sense of dread washed over him. The stranger's pickup truck had pulled in behind him, and the man emerged from the vehicle, wearing the same scary smile as before. Mark's heart raced as he realized the stranger had been following him all along. He considered his options, but the isolation of the rest area left him with few choices. The stranger approached his car, and Mark locked the doors, his hand trembling as he reached for his cell phone, still hoping for a signal. The stranger tapped on the window, his grin growing wider and more unsettling. "You tried to lose me back there, didn't you? That's not very nice." Fear coursed through Mark's veins, and he had no doubt that the stranger's intentions were far from benign. Desperation gripped him, and he reached for the car's ignition, preparing to make a hasty escape. But before he could react, the stranger produced a knife from his pocket, its blade glinting in the dim light. He began to slash at the tires of Mark's car, rendering it immobile. Panic and terror consumed Mark as he realized the dire situation he was in. With his car incapacitated, Mark had no choice but to open the window and face the menacing stranger. The man's smile had transformed into a sadistic grin, and he leaned in closer, the glint of the knife blade dancing in his eyes. "You shouldn't have tried to run, friend," the stranger whispered, his voice dripping with malice. Just as Mark feared the worst, the rest area's silence was shattered by the distant wail of sirens. The approaching police cars' flashing lights painted the scene with a sense of hope. The stranger, realizing the imminent danger, retreated and fled to his pickup truck. The police car skidded to a stop, and officers apprehended the stranger, who struggled violently but was eventually subdued. Mark's heart pounded with a mixture of relief and gratitude. The police explained that the man was a known criminal with a history of violence and assault. They had been tracking him for some time, and Mark's call for help had led them to the rest area just in the nick of time. Story 3. David and Sarah, a married couple, set out on a romantic getaway to celebrate their anniversary. They decided to explore the less-traveled back roads of the countryside, hoping to discover hidden gems and make memories together. The open road stretched before them, and they were filled with anticipation and excitement. The journey was punctuated by laughter, heartfelt conversations, and moments of pure happiness. They cherished the serenity of the open road, taking turns behind the wheel, and stopping at quaint roadside diners and antique shops. One evening they found themselves on a winding, desolate road, far from the bustling towns they had grown accustomed to. The remoteness of the area was almost creepy, with dense forests on either side of the road and no other vehicles in sight. As the day waned and the sun dipped below the horizon, David noticed that their fuel gauge was nearing empty. Sarah glanced at the gauge and said, "We should look for a gas station soon. The nearest town should have one." With growing concern, they continued driving, their eyes scanning the forested landscape for any signs of civilization. But as the fuel gauge inched closer to E, a sense of unease began to settle in. David muttered, "We're running low on gas. I hope we find a station soon." Just when their anxiety was reaching its peak, they spotted a small road sign that pointed to a nearby gas station. Their relief was palpable as they followed the signs to the station, anticipating a chance to refuel and continue their journey. However, when they reached the gas station, their optimism turned to dismay. It was dark and abandoned, a relic from a bygone era. The pumps were old and rusted, with no sign of life around. It became clear that the station had been out of operation for years. With a heavy heart, David turned to Sarah and said, "It looks like we'll have to find another station. Let's hope there's one not too far away." As they continued driving down the winding road, the forest grew denser and the sense of isolation more pronounced. Sarah, peering at the map, suggested that there was another gas station a few miles ahead. But as they drove on, there was still no sign of civilization, and their fuel gauge inched perilously close to empty. The anxiety that had been simmering for some time began to boil over. David felt a growing sense of dread, but he didn't want to burden Sarah with his fear. Instead, he kept his eyes on the road, searching for any sign of hope. Just when they were beginning to lose hope, they spotted a small, secluded house nestled in the woods. A dim light glowed in one of the windows, offering a faint glimmer of hope. David decided to stop and ask for directions or help, thinking that maybe the residents would have a gas can or some information about the nearest station. As they approached the house, the atmosphere grew increasingly strange. The dense woods seemed to encroach upon the road, and the night was eerily silent. The sense of isolation was overwhelming, and it felt as if they were the only people for miles around. David parked the car in front of the house, and they hesitantly approached the front door. As they reached the porch, they could hear faint, muffled voices from inside, and the sound of clinking utensils and dishes. Sarah whispered, "It seems like a family dinner. Let's knock and ask for help." David agreed, and he raised his hand to knock on the door. But before he could do so, the door swung open with a creak, revealing a tall, imposing man in his 50s. He had a scruffy beard and intense, unblinking eyes that seemed to pierce through David and Sarah. "Can I help you?" the man asked, his voice steady but devoid of warmth. David stammered, "We're out of gas and we were wondering if you could point us to the nearest gas station. We saw your lights on and thought maybe you could help." The man's smile was strained and his gaze never left them. "I'm sorry, but we're quite far from the nearest gas station. You're welcome to come inside and wait for morning, but we can't offer any gas." As they entered the house, the weird atmosphere only intensified. The interior was strange, and the dining room was filled with people, their faces blank and devoid of emotion. It was as if the entire family had been frozen in time, trapped in a strange tableau. The man introduced David and Sarah to his family, but there was something deeply unsettling about the encounter. The family members barely acknowledged their presence, and their dinner table was laid out with strange, unappetizing dishes. The air was heavy with silence, punctuated only by the sound of utensils scraping against plates. As David and Sarah sat at the table, the man's demeanor grew more unnerving. He continued to stare at them, his gaze unyielding. "You must be hungry after your journey. Please help yourselves to dinner." David and Sarah glanced at the peculiar dishes before them, unable to hide their discomfort. The food appeared to be a mix of unidentifiable ingredients, and an odd odor permeated the room. They politely declined the offer, but the man insisted, his insistence growing increasingly unsettling. Hours passed, and the couple found themselves trapped in a strange, unsettling limbo. The family remained unresponsive, their strange tableau unchanged. David and Sarah felt like unwelcome guests, and the fear that had been simmering beneath the surface grew more pronounced. Finally, as the clock approached midnight, the man rose from the table and approached David and Sarah, his eyes fixed on them with an unsettling intensity. "You can't leave. You must stay the night." Sarah's heart raced as she asked, "Why can't we leave?" "We just need to find a gas station." The man's response was chilling. "You can't leave because you've seen too much. You know our secret, and we can't allow you to leave." In an instant, the situation escalated from strange to horrifying. The man's demeanor turned menacing, and his family members rose from the table, their blank faces now contorted with malevolence. David and Sarah realized that they were in grave danger. With adrenaline surging through their veins, they made a desperate attempt to escape. They bolted for the front door, but the man and his family pursued them with a chilling determination. As they raced back to their car, the night seemed to close in on them, the forest swallowing them whole. The pursuit was relentless, and the man's sinister laughter echoed through the woods. Desperation drove David and Sarah to their limits as they tried to outrun their pursuers. They sprinted through the thick woods, their breaths ragged and their hearts pounding. But the family's knowledge of the terrain gave them an advantage, and the pursuit showed no signs of relenting. Just when it seemed that David and Sarah were doomed, they stumbled upon a small cabin in the woods. The door was unlocked and they burst inside, barricading themselves in. The family members arrived moments later, their hands pounding on the door with a terrifying, relentless rhythm. David and Sarah huddled together, their hearts racing as they realized the direness of their situation. The cabin's interior was shrouded in darkness, and they knew that they had no means of escape. The scary sounds of the family members outside, their footsteps and taunts, filled the cabin with dread. As the night wore on, the couple's hope began to fade. The sinister family showed no signs of giving up, and the relentless pursuit had become a nightmare that refused to end. The darkness was their only ally, but it couldn't shield them from the malevolent presence lurking just outside the cabin. In the darkness, David and Sarah clung to each other, their fear and desperation consuming them. The horrifying realization that they were trapped in a remote cabin with no hope of escape, at the mercy of a sinister family, was a nightmare come to life. I had been out with friends one Saturday night, and the time had slipped away from me. By the time I realized I needed to head home, it was already past midnight, and the city was shrouded in a scary stillness. I knew taking an Uber was the safest option at this hour, so I requested a ride and watched as the app matched me with a driver named Mark. Mark's car arrived within minutes, and I hurriedly climbed into the back seat, eager to get home. He greeted me with a friendly smile and asked for my destination. I mumbled my address, and he pulled away from the curb. The ride started like any other. We exchanged pleasantries, talking about the weather, our weekends, and other small talk. Mark seemed polite and unassuming, a middle-aged man with a calm demeanor. I relaxed into the ride, letting the soft hum of the engine lull me into a sense of security. As we drove through the streets, my thoughts wandered. I couldn't help but feel a tinge of unease. The city looked different at night, its familiar landmarks casting long, dark shadows. I reminded myself that I was in an Uber, one of the safest ways to get around, or so I had always believed. My unease deepened when I noticed that Mark was taking a different route than usual. It was a longer, more desolate path that led through an industrial area. I questioned him, my voice trembling slightly. "Why are we going this way? Isn't there a quicker route?" Mark turned to me, and his eyes seemed to glitter with an unsettling intensity in the car. "Oh, this is a shortcut, trust me. It'll save us some time." I wanted to believe him, but my instincts were screaming that something was wrong. I glanced at my phone, the GPS screen confirming that we were veering off the regular route. Panic began to churn in my stomach. I was about to protest again when Mark suddenly slowed down and pulled over to the side of the road. My heart pounded in my chest as I realized we were in a desolate industrial area with no signs of life around. The silence was oppressive, and the only light came from the street lamp above us. Mark turned off the engine and smiled, but it was a smile that freaked me out. "I think we should take a little detour." Panic washed over me, and I fumbled for my phone, ready to call for help or dial 911. But Mark leaned closer, his breath hot on my neck, and his hand snaked out to grab my phone. "Where do you think you're going?" he hissed, his voice laced with malice. "You're not calling anyone." The realization hit me like a freight train. This wasn't a mere detour, it was a nightmare unfolding before my eyes. I was alone in a car with a sinister man, miles away from help, and I had no way to defend myself. I knew I had to act quickly. With adrenaline surging through my veins, I opened the car door and bolted out onto the dark street. My heart was pounding, and I could hear Mark's enraged shouts as he chased after me. The industrial area was a maze of shadows and silence, and I had no idea where I was or where I could find help. My legs carried me through the deserted streets, and I finally stumbled upon a small convenience store with its lights still on. I burst inside, gasping for breath, my eyes wild with fear. The store clerk, an elderly man, looked at me with concern and asked what had happened. I quickly explained the terrifying encounter with the Uber driver, and the clerk called the police. Within minutes, they arrived, and I provided them with a description of the man who had been driving the car. They assured me they would do everything in their power to find him. I was taken to the police station to give a formal statement, my hands trembling as I recounted the horror of the past hour. I learned that the car I had been in was reported stolen, and Mark was nowhere to be found. It was clear he had intended to harm me, and I had narrowly escaped a horrific fate. In the days that followed, the police conducted an extensive search for Mark, but he seemed to have vanished without a trace. I couldn't shake the feeling that he might still be out there, lurking in the shadows, waiting for another unsuspecting victim. Second story. My best friend Emily and I had decided to spend a girls' night out in the city. We painted the town red, dancing the night away at a local club. By the time the night was over, the city was shrouded in darkness. We knew it was time to call an Uber to get back home. The app quickly matched us with a driver, a man named Victor. We watched the little car icon on the screen approach our location, and when it finally pulled up in front of the club, we eagerly climbed into the back seat. Victor greeted us with a polite smile and asked for our destination. The ride began as expected. Victor was a middle-aged man with a kind, gentle demeanor. We engaged in friendly small talk, discussing our night out, the music, and our plans for the weekend. The warm, welcoming atmosphere in the car put us at ease, and we relaxed into our seats. The city had a different charm in the quiet hours of the night, and I couldn't help but gaze out of the window, taking in the serene beauty of the darkened streets. Emily and I continued to chat, laughing and sharing stories. As we ventured deeper into the city, I noticed that Victor was taking an unfamiliar route. I assumed it was a shortcut or an alternate way to avoid traffic. I glanced at my phone's GPS, but it was difficult to discern our location. The city looked different at night, and I didn't recognize the streets. I asked Victor about the route, my voice tinged with curiosity. "Is this a new way to get to our destination? I don't remember this route." Victor turned to us, his eyes glinting with an unsettling intensity. His voice, once warm, had taken on a sinister tone. "Oh, I thought we could take a little detour, see some sights." My unease grew as I noticed the street signs passing by, confirming that we were veering off the regular route. I felt a sinking feeling in my chest, the initial warmth and security of the car replaced by a growing sense of dread. I was about to insist that Victor return to the original route when he suddenly slowed down and pulled over to the side of the road. My heart raced as I realized we were in a desolate, unfamiliar area with no signs of life around. The silence was suffocating, and the only light came from the street lamp above us. Victor turned off the engine and fixed us with a smile, but it was a smile that creeped me out. "I think we should take a little detour." Panic welled up inside me, and I fumbled for my phone, ready to call for help. But before I could dial, Victor's hand shot out and snatched my phone from my grasp. "Where do you think you're going?" he hissed, his voice laced with malice. "You're not calling anyone." Emily and I exchanged fearful glances, and we knew we had to act fast. As the car came to a stop at a deserted intersection, we seized the opportunity to escape. We flung open the doors and bolted out of the vehicle, our hearts pounding. We sprinted through the streets, our breaths ragged and our minds filled with fear. Victor's enraged shouts echoed through the scary silence of the night as he pursued us, his footsteps getting closer with every passing moment. Desperation drove us to keep running, our legs carrying us through the darkened streets. We had no idea where we were or where we could find help, but we knew we had to escape this nightmare. In the distance, we spotted a small convenience store with its light still on. We burst inside, gasping for breath, our eyes wide with fear. The store clerk, a young woman, looked at us with concern and asked what had happened. We quickly explained the terrifying encounter with the Uber driver, and the clerk called the police. Within minutes, they arrived, and we provided them with a description of the man who had been driving the car. They assured us they would do everything in their power to find him. We were taken to the police station to give a formal statement, our hands trembling as we recounted the horror of the past hour. It was clear he had intended to harm us, and we had narrowly escaped a horrific fate. In the days that followed, the police conducted an extensive search for Victor, but he seemed to have vanished without a trace. We couldn't shake the feeling that he might still be out there, lurking in the shadows waiting for another unsuspecting victim. Third story. I'd been working late at the office, trying to meet a pressing deadline. It was well past midnight when I finally packed up my things and realized that I had missed the last train home. With no other option, I decided to call an Uber to take me back. Within minutes, the app found a driver named Jeremy, and I received a notification that he would be arriving shortly. I stepped out of the office building and into the chilly night, hoping to get home as soon as possible. Jeremy's car pulled up in front of the building, and I climbed into the back seat. He greeted me with a polite smile, and I gave him my address. The car pulled away from the curb, and I settled into my seat, eager to get some rest after a long day at work. The ride started like any other. We exchanged pleasantries, with Jeremy making small talk about the weather in the city. He seemed like an average guy, probably in his late 20s, with an unassuming appearance. My initial unease at taking an Uber so late at night began to subside, and I allowed myself to relax. As we drove through the quiet, dark streets, my exhaustion began to catch up with me. The soft hum of the engine and the rhythmic sound of the tires against the pavement had a soothing effect, and I found myself drifting in and out of sleep. I was suddenly jolted awake when I noticed that Jeremy had taken a different route. My heart skipped a beat as I glanced at the GPS on my phone. The screen confirmed that we were veering off the regular route, and I questioned him, my voice filled with concern. "Why are we going this way? I've taken this route dozens of times and it's never been this long." Jeremy didn't respond right away, and I watched as he made another unexpected turn. I felt a chill run down my neck as I realized that we were heading deeper into a desolate industrial area that I had never seen before. The unease in the car grew palpable, and I asked again, my voice trembling, "Jeremy, why are we going this way? This isn't the right route." Jeremy turned to me, his eyes glinting with an unsettling intensity. His voice, once cheerful, had taken on a sinister tone. "Oh, I thought we could take a little detour, see some sights." Panic began to gnaw at me, and I tried to remain calm. "No, I just want to get home. Please take me back to the regular route." Jeremy's smile was forced and disconcerting. "Don't worry, we'll get there eventually." The car continued to move through the desolate industrial area, and I knew that I was in a dangerous situation. Fear coursed through my veins as I realized that Jeremy's intentions were far from benign. I was alone in a car, miles away from help, with no means to protect myself. Desperation drove me to take action. I reached for my phone to call for help, but before I could dial, Jeremy's hand shot out and snatched the phone from my grasp. "Where do you think you're going?" he hissed, his voice oozing malice. "You're not calling anyone." My heart was pounding, and I knew I had to do something. I needed to escape this nightmare. As the car came to a stop at a desolate intersection, I seized the opportunity. I flung open the door and bolted out of the vehicle, my heart racing with adrenaline. I sprinted through the industrial area, my breath ragged and my mind filled with fear. I could hear Jeremy's enraged shouts as he chased after me, his footsteps echoing through the quiet silence of the night. I had no idea where I was, but I knew I had to keep running. The streets were empty, and the darkness seemed to stretch on forever. I desperately searched for a place to hide, or someone who could help me. In the distance, I spotted a small convenience store with its lights still on. I ran inside, gasping for breath, my eyes wild with fear. The store clerk, a young woman, looked at me with concern and asked what had happened. I quickly explained the terrifying encounter with the Uber driver, and the clerk called the police. Within minutes, they arrived, and I provided them with a description of the man who had been driving the car. They assured me they would do everything in their power to find him. I was taken to the police station to give a formal statement, my hands trembling as I recounted the horror of the past hour. I learned that Jeremy's car was reported stolen, and he was nowhere to be found. It was clear he had intended to harm me, and I had narrowly escaped a horrific fate. In the days that followed, the police conducted an extensive search for Jeremy, but he seemed to have vanished without a trace. I couldn't shake the feeling that he might still be out there, lurking in the shadows, waiting for another unsuspecting victim. Once in a quiet and remote village nestled in the heart of 18th century Europe, where the whispers of the dense forest encroached upon every dwelling, a tale of terror and tragedy was woven into the very fabric of the community. It was a story kept secret for generations, a dark memory that one daughter, now grown, was finally ready to share. The daughter, Elena, sat in a dark room with her granddaughter, Clara, who was visiting from the bustling city. The old woman's face was weathered, her eyes heavy with the weight of years lived, and her hands trembling as she clutched a worn diary. The diary had been passed down through the family, a relic of times long past, filled with secrets and stories that had chilled the hearts of generations. Elena's voice quivered as she began her tale, her words like the ghostly echoes of the past. "Clara, my dear, I want to tell you about your great-great-grandmother, Eliza. She was the daughter of a woman who, in her own time, was whispered about in hushed tones as a witch." Clara's eyes widened with curiosity and a touch of trepidation. "A witch, Grandma? You mean like casting spells and flying on broomsticks?" Elena chuckled softly. "No, not like that, my child. There were no broomsticks or cauldrons in our family. What I mean is that Eliza's mother, a woman named Agnes, was accused of witchcraft in a time when fear and superstition ran deep, and she paid a terrible price. The tale began to unfold as Elena delved into the diary, her voice filled with both nostalgia and sadness. In the heart of the 18th century, the village of Eldenwood was a place of natural beauty and isolation, where the whispers of the forest concealed more secrets than the villagers dared to admit. Agnes, a woman of singular beauty and enigmatic charm, lived on the outskirts of the village in a small cottage nestled between ancient oaks. The villagers gossiped about her, and many believed her to possess a strange power. Some spoke of her uncanny ability to heal wounds and illnesses, while others whispered of her strange herbs and potions. Eliza, her daughter, had grown up in the shadow of her mother's mysterious reputation. Her striking resemblance to Agnes only fueled the rumors, and as she reached adolescence, the whispers turned from admiration to suspicion. Eliza was a quiet and introspective girl, finding solace in the secrets of the forest that surrounded their home. She often ventured deep into the woods, drawn to the silence and the hidden glens where the air was thick with enchantment. One fateful evening, Eliza was returning from one of her forest excursions when she crossed paths with a man she had never seen before. Tall and imposing, he was draped in tattered clothing, his beard unkempt, and his eyes gleaming with a feral intensity. He introduced himself as Matthias, a wanderer who had lost his way. Eliza, compassionate by nature, offered him food and shelter for the night. As the days turned into weeks, Matthias's presence cast a dark shadow over the cottage. He was not the harmless wanderer he had appeared to be. He whispered to Eliza of power and secrets, of forces hidden deep within the forest that could be harnessed to change one's fate. At first, Eliza resisted his charms, but slowly, his words began to take hold of her. The isolation of their cottage and the allure of the unknown proved too enticing. Agnes, sensing the growing danger, confronted her daughter. "Eliza, you must be cautious of this man. He carries with him a darkness I cannot explain. There is no power worth the price he may demand." But Eliza, now enthralled by Matthias, could not hear her mother's warning. She believed that her destiny was intertwined with the strangers, that together they could unlock the secrets of the forest. Days turned into nights, and nights into fevered rituals deep in the heart of the woods. The villagers, fearful and suspicious, watched from afar as Eliza and Matthias grew more enigmatic with each passing day. They knew that something had to be done, for their superstitions and paranoia had reached a fever pitch. They believed Agnes and her daughter were witches, and their presence was a curse upon Eldenwood. One night, as the moon hung low in the sky, the villagers, armed with torches and resolve, descended upon Agnes's cottage. The scene that unfolded was one of chaos and terror. Agnes and Eliza were dragged from their home, accused of practicing dark sorcery. They were bound, their hands and feet tightly secured, and the mob began chanting accusatory spells and curses. Amid the chaos, Matthias, who had quietly disappeared into the night, watched from the shadows. He had manipulated the villagers, knowing that their fear and ignorance would be their downfall. As the torches drew closer, he slipped away, leaving Agnes and Eliza to face the wrath of the mob. Elena paused for a moment, her eyes filled with tears as she recalled the pain of her ancestors. "It was a gruesome sight, Clara. I won't go into the details of the trials and the torture, but it was a horrific ordeal that Agnes and Eliza endured. In the end, they were found guilty of witchcraft." Clara shivered, her imagination running wild with the horrors of that night. "What happened to them, Grandma?" Elena took a deep breath, her voice trembling with the weight of the story. "They were taken to the outskirts of the village, tied to stakes, and the mob, driven to madness by their fear and ignorance, set them on fire. Agnes and Eliza, mother and daughter, burned together in the name of superstition." The room fell into a heavy silence as Clara tried to process the gruesome ending of the tale. The horror of that night, the innocence of Agnes and Eliza, and the cruelty of the villagers haunted her thoughts. Elena continued, "The worst part, Clara, is that Matthias, the true manipulator, was never found. He vanished into the darkness of the forest, leaving a trail of destruction in his wake." Clara, her young heart heavy with the weight of the story, finally spoke. "But why are you telling me this, Grandma? Why share this dark secret now?" Elena's eyes met Clara's with a mixture of sadness and determination. "I tell you this because the memory of what happened to Agnes and Eliza must never be forgotten. We must remember the darkness that can lurk in the hearts of those who spread fear and hatred." We must remember that true evil often wears the mask of innocence. And most importantly, we must remember that it is our duty to ensure that such horrors are never repeated. Story 2. In a remote and secluded village nestled deep within the heart of the 17th century countryside, a dark and haunting tale of superstition and fear unfolded. It was a story of a mother, her son, and a horrifying tragedy born from suspicion of witchcraft. The village, like many others of the time, was steeped in superstitions and folklore, where the line between reality and the supernatural was often blurred. Among the villagers there lived a woman named Isabella, a solitary figure who resided in a cottage at the edge of the woods. Isabella had always been an enigmatic presence, her long, raven-black hair cascading down her back, her eyes a deep, piercing blue that seemed to hold the secrets of the universe. Her attire, flowing and dark, set her apart from the traditional villagers, and her affinity for herbs, potions, and natural remedies only added to the mystery surrounding her. The villagers whispered tales of Isabella's uncanny knowledge of the forest, her ability to communicate with animals, and her supposed power to influence the weather. Her cottage, adorned with peculiar symbols and charms, was believed to be a place of magic and enchantment, and the villagers regarded it with a mix of fascination and fear. Over time, the rumors about Isabella took a darker turn. Whispers of spells, curses, and a pact with the devil circulated through the village. The symbols that adorned her cottage were seen as ominous, and her affinity for the natural world was reinterpreted as something sinister. As the villagers succumbed to paranoia and suspicion, a fear of witchcraft began to grip the community. Accusations were made, and Isabella found herself at the center of a growing storm. The village, caught in the throes of hysteria, demanded that she be brought to justice. It was during a period of unrelenting fear and suspicion that Isabella's son, William, found himself torn between his loyalty to his mother and the pressure of the villagers. He had always known that his mother was different, but he could not fathom that she could be capable of the sinister acts she was accused of. As the accusations mounted, William found himself caught in a web of conflicting emotions. He loved his mother deeply and believed in her innocence, yet the fear and hysteria that pervaded the village threatened to consume them both. One fateful day, the village council convened to decide Isabella's fate. The accusations against her were grave, and the council, swayed by the fear and paranoia of the villagers, declared her a witch. She was to be put on trial and, if found guilty, subjected to a punishment that struck terror into the hearts of all who heard it. The trial was a harrowing ordeal, a spectacle that drew the villagers like moths to a flame. Isabella stood before the council, her head held high, and declared her innocence. She spoke of her love for the natural world, her knowledge of healing, and her desire to live in harmony with the village. But her words fell on deaf ears. The accusations of witchcraft were too deeply ingrained in the minds of the villagers, and they saw Isabella as a threat to their very existence. The evidence against her, largely circumstantial and based on fear, was enough to sway the council's judgment. Isabella was declared guilty of witchcraft, and the council pronounced a punishment that would put fear into every villager. She was to be tied to a stake and cast into the deep, forbidding waters of the village pond, a method of execution believed to purify the village from her dark influence. The day of Isabella's execution dawned, casting a dark shadow over the village. The villagers gathered at the edge of the pond, their faces a mixture of dread and anticipation. Isabella, her hands bound and her eyes filled with determination, was led to the stake that stood at the water's edge. As she gazed out at the crowd that had gathered to witness her fate, Isabella's eyes met her son's. William, torn between his love for his mother and the pressure of the villagers, could not bear to watch her suffer. The executioner, his face a mask of determination, bound Isabella to the stake and prepared to carry out the sentence. The crowd watched in silence as the stake was set ablaze and Isabella's body was cast into the dark, icy waters of the pond. Story 3. In the heart of a remote village named Fairhaven, nestled amidst the rolling hills of 18th century Europe, there existed a dark and harrowing tale, a story of persecution, hysteria, and the horrifying fate of a woman accused of being a witch. The villagers of Fairhaven were not unlike those of many other villages during that superstitious time. They lived in fear of the unknown and harbored deep suspicions of anyone who appeared different or held unconventional beliefs. Among them was a woman named Eliza, who resided on the outskirts of the village in a small, thatched-roof cottage. Eliza, with her unconventional appearance and her love for the natural world, was the subject of whispered rumors and wary glances. Her long auburn hair, vibrant and untamed, flowed like a river of flames down her back, and her bright green eyes radiated an otherworldly intelligence. Her attire consisted of flowing, earth-toned garments that marked her as a figure apart from the traditional villagers. But it was not just Eliza's appearance that set her apart. It was her knowledge of the natural world and her affinity for herbs and potions. She had a garden that bloomed with rare and unusual plants, and her understanding of the healing properties of herbs was said to be unparalleled. In the eyes of the villagers, these talents were not a source of admiration but of suspicion. They whispered tales of her ability to conjure storms, heal wounds, and speak to the spirits of the forest. Her garden, which seemed to flourish even in the harshest of seasons, was believed to be enchanted, a place where dark rituals and spells were conducted. Rumors of witchcraft began to circulate, and with each passing day, the fear and suspicion grew. It was the early days of the witch hunts, and Fairhaven was not immune to the frenzy that had gripped the region. Accusations were flung like daggers, and the village became a breeding ground for paranoia. The village council, fueled by the whispers and fear, made a fateful decision. They deemed Eliza a witch and declared that she must be brought to justice. The accusation sent shockwaves through the village, and many believed it was a mistake, a result of superstition and hysteria. Eliza, aware of the accusations against her, chose to face the council with dignity and poise. She stood before them, her head held high, and spoke of her love for the natural world, her knowledge of healing, and her desire to live in harmony with the village. She declared her innocence, but her words fell on deaf ears. The village council, swayed by the fear and superstition that had taken root, found Eliza guilty of witchcraft. Her fate was sealed, and the sentence was to be carried out with haste. She was to be hanged in the village square, a punishment that was meant to serve as a warning to all who dared to defy the established norms. As the day of Eliza's execution drew near, a sense of dread settled over the village. Many could not shake the feeling that they were condemning an innocent woman to her death. Some even believed that Eliza's knowledge and affinity for nature were gifts, not curses, and that the village would suffer for its decision. The day of the execution arrived, casting a pall of gloom over Fairhaven. The villagers gathered in the square, their faces somber and hearts heavy. Eliza, her hands bound, was led to the gallows, where a crowd had gathered to witness the horrifying spectacle. As she stood on the platform, the noose around her neck, Eliza remained composed. She refused to beg for mercy or admit to a crime she had not committed. She looked out at the villagers with a sadness in her eyes, a silent plea for understanding and compassion. The crowd watched in silence as the executioner tightened the noose and prepared to carry out the sentence. But just as the trapdoor was about to be released, a commotion erupted in the crowd. A man, his clothes disheveled and his face contorted with anguish, pushed his way to the front. It was Benjamin, Eliza's husband. Stop this madness," Benjamin cried, his voice breaking with emotion. He had been absent during the trial, away on a journey to a neighboring village, and had only just returned to the horrifying news. The executioner hesitated, and the crowd grew restless. Benjamin, his eyes filled with desperation, pleaded with the council and the villagers to spare his wife's life. He spoke of her innocence, of her love for the village, and of the terrible mistake that was about to be made. The village council, caught in a moment of uncertainty, decided to delay the execution. Benjamin's impassioned plea had stirred doubt and a glimmer of compassion among some of the villagers. It was decided that Eliza's fate would be revisited the next day, and the crowd dispersed, leaving the gallows empty. That night, the village was filled with unease and tension. The decision to delay Eliza's execution had created a sense of division among the villagers. Some believed that the delay was a sign that justice would prevail, while others saw it as an opportunity to further condemn her. Eliza, imprisoned in a small, cold cell, awaited her fate. She was aware of the turmoil that had engulfed the village, and her heart ached for her husband, who had risked everything to save her. As the sun rose on the day of the reconsideration, the village council gathered to decide Eliza's fate once more. The crowd that had assembled was a sea of conflicting emotions, with some pleading for her release and others demanding her immediate execution. Benjamin, having spent the night pleading with the villagers and council members, made a final, impassioned appeal for his wife's life. He spoke of the injustice that would be committed if Eliza were to be hanged for a crime she had not committed. The village council, after much deliberation and internal strife, made a decision. Eliza would not be hanged, but she would be banished from the village. She was to leave Fairhaven and never return, a punishment that would ensure that the village remained free of her supposed influence. The decision brought a mixed reaction from the villagers. Some felt that justice had been served, while others believed that Eliza had been wronged and that the banishment was a cruel and unjust punishment. Benjamin, relieved that his wife's life had been spared, was left with a heavy heart. Eliza, her face marked with resignation, gathered her belongings and prepared to leave the village that had been her home for so long. She felt the weight of the unfair judgment that had been cast upon her, and the pain of being separated from her husband was almost unbearable. As she walked to the edge of the village, the villagers watched in silence. They had been part of a dark and haunting chapter in their village's history, one that would be remembered with regret and sorrow. Eliza, as she crossed the boundary that marked the end of Fairhaven, cast a last mournful glance back at her home. Deep within the heart of Whispering Pines Forest, there existed a dark secret hidden from the eyes of mankind. For generations, the locals had shared chilling tales of a malevolent creature that roamed the woods, a being that emerged only in the shroud of night, seeking to torment anyone who dared to enter its realm. They called it the Phantom of Whispering Pines. One gloomy evening, under a heavy rain-laden sky, a brave soul named Alex ventured into the heart of Whispering Pines Forest. The stories of the phantom had always intrigued them, and they were determined to uncover the truth behind the legend. Armed with a flashlight and a sense of determination, Alex set out to explore the enigmatic woods. The forest was dense with ancient trees, their gnarled branches intertwined like skeletal fingers. The thick canopy above allowed only the faintest trickle of light to penetrate, casting shadows on the forest floor. As the sky darkened, the air grew heavy with an unnatural silence, broken only by the hushed whisper of the wind through the leaves. The forest's stillness only fueled Alex's curiosity as they delved deeper into the undergrowth. The uneven path was overgrown, and thorns clawed at their clothing, leaving trails of blood in their wake. The beam of the flashlight revealed twisted, gnarled roots that seemed to reach out, as if warning Alex to turn back. Despite the ominous atmosphere, Alex pressed forward. The tales of the phantom were a mere catalyst for their insatiable desire for the unknown. As the night deepened, the forest appeared to shift and twist, the trees closing in around them as if forming an impenetrable barrier. It was in the heart of Whispering Pines that Alex found a small, dilapidated cabin, hidden amidst the ancient trees. It was said to be the lair of the phantom, and Alex was determined to uncover its secrets. The cabin's wooden door was ajar, and with a deep breath they pushed it open. Inside, the cabin was a scene of disarray. Broken furniture, rotting curtains, and cobwebs clung to every surface. The air was stagnant and heavy with a rancid odor. As Alex explored further, they found a weathered journal on a decaying wooden desk. The journal spoke of the phantom, a creature born of darkness, a manifestation of ancient curses and forgotten rituals. The entries detailed how the locals had long ago sealed the creature within the depths of the forest, hoping to confine it to their nightmares forever. However, it was a curse that had merely slumbered, waiting for an unwitting soul to awaken it. The last page of the journal contained a warning, urging any who read it to flee the forest before nightfall, lest they become the unwitting catalyst for the phantom's resurgence. Alex's heart raced as they read the ominous words, but they were determined to uncover the truth. Ignoring the warning, they ventured further into the forest, driven by an insatiable need to unravel the enigma of the phantom. The forest grew denser, the shadows more menacing, and the silence seemed to deepen. As the moon reached its zenith, Alex's flashlight flickered, casting uncertain light on the gnarled trees. Panic surged through them as the flashlight died, leaving them in darkness. The forest seemed to come alive, the trees whispering in an unknown tongue, and Alex heard the phantom of approaching footsteps. The creature, an amalgamation of darkness and malice, emerged from the shadows. Its form shifted and swirled, a grotesque, ever-changing silhouette. It drew closer, its malevolent presence suffocating. Alex stumbled backward in terror, their heart pounding in their chest. With a spine-chilling shriek, the phantom lunged forward, its shadowy tendrils reaching out like vipers. Alex's screams echoed through the forest as the creature enveloped them, dragging them into the abyss of whispering pines. Story 2. Nestled deep within the heart of the Whispering Woods lay an ancient, abandoned mansion known as the Forsaken Manor. It was a place of dread, surrounded by legends and superstitions. Locals whispered tales of its haunting history, where a once prominent family met a tragic end. The Forsaken Manor was said to be cursed, its halls echoing with the tormented souls of the past. On a moonless night under the thick canopy of trees, a solitary figure approached the mansion. Her name was Emily, a young woman with a penchant for the macabre. Her fascination with the supernatural had drawn her to the Forsaken Manor, and she was determined to unravel its mysteries. Armed with a lantern and a journal, she ventured forward into the inky darkness. The mansion's gates creaked open, and Emily's lantern illuminated the overgrown path, revealing thorny vines and twisted trees that seemed to reach for her like skeletal fingers. A silence enveloped the area as if the very air held its breath. Emily continued her journey, her heart pounding in her chest. The front doors of the mansion groaned open, revealing an entrance hall that was once grand but now lay in ruin. Cracked marble floors and shattered chandeliers greeted her, and shadows danced on the walls like restless spirits. Her lantern's feeble light created a flickering, ghostly effect. As Emily explored further, she discovered a library with tattered, rotting books. Some were barely readable, containing cryptic accounts of the Forsaken Manor's dark past. It was said that the family had practiced forbidden rituals, and in their desperation, they made a pact with a malevolent force. Undeterred by the stories, Emily pressed on. She ascended a majestic staircase, each step groaning as if protesting her intrusion. On the second floor, she found a corridor with countless closed doors. She hesitated, then chose one at random. Inside, a bedroom awaited, frozen in time. A 4-poster bed draped with cobwebs, a vanity covered in dust, and a shattered mirror that reflected Emily as a ghostly, distorted figure. Emily sensed something amiss. The room felt alive, as if it pulsed with an invisible energy. Turning to leave, the door slammed shut with a resounding crash. Panic surged through Emily as she struggled to open it, but it refused to budge. The room itself seemed to close in around her, the walls drawing nearer and the air growing colder. She heard faint whispers, words that sent shivers down her spine. Terrified, Emily finally forced the door open, stumbling back into the corridor. Her lantern flickered and died, plunging her into darkness. She felt an oppressive presence behind her, a malevolence that radiated hatred and cruelty. Whispers filled the air, growing louder and more coherent, though their meaning remained cryptic. Frantic, Emily ran down the corridor, her footsteps echoing erratically. The walls seemed to ripple and twist, and the whispers turned into chilling laughter. She burst into the entry hall, where shattered chandeliers cast grotesque, dancing shadows. Desperation gripped her as she pushed open the front doors and fled into the night. Story 3. In a quiet, forgotten corner of the small town of Willowbrook, there stood a decaying mansion, its once grand facade now crumbling under the weight of time. It was known as the O'Donnell House, and it had been abandoned for decades, its dark history shrouded in mystery. The townspeople whispered stories of a curse that had plagued the O'Donnell family for generations, tales of unexplained disappearances and tragic deaths. The mansion was a place of legend, but few dared to venture near it, let alone enter its ominous doors. However, curiosity can be a powerful motivator, and it drew one brave soul into the shadow of the mansion on a moonless night. Her name was Sarah,